My name is Erin Mitchell, and at 26, I sat alone at my father's funeral while my mother and stepfather left after just 20 minutes. When they threw away Dad's locked military trunk the next day, calling it mildew-infested garbage, I thought I'd lost the last piece of him forever. But then a stranger showed up at my door, holding something wrapped in an old American flag, saying he'd served with my father and couldn't keep what he'd found. What he handed me that day changed everything I thought I knew about the man who raised me, the woman who resented me, and the family secrets that had been locked away for decades. If you're watching this video right now, I'd love to know where you're from. Drop it in the comment section below. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories like this. The folding chairs were half empty, and the two seats that mattered most had been abandoned 20 minutes into the service. I sat alone in the front row, watching the honor guard fold the American flag with practiced precision, each crease sharp enough to cut through the silence that my mother and stepfather had left behind. He wouldn't have wanted a fuss, Mom had whispered before slipping out with Cal, her heels clicking against the funeral home's polished floor like a countdown to their escape. But Dad would have wanted someone to stay. He would have wanted someone to receive that flag, to hear taps played in his honor, to remember that before he was my father, before he was Monica's husband, before he became whatever disappointment she'd decided he was, he'd been a soldier who deserved this respect. The triangular flag felt heavier than it should have when they placed it in my hands. On behalf of a grateful nation, the young sergeant said, his voice steady despite the rain beginning to tap against the windows. I nodded, unable to speak past the thickness in my throat. Behind me, I heard shuffling. The few veterans from Dad's old unit who'd shown up were leaving now too. Only Mr. Abramson from next door remained, his weathered hand briefly squeezing my shoulder before he too departed. I stayed until the funeral director gently suggested they needed to prepare for the next service. Even then, I couldn't bring myself to leave immediately. Instead, I found myself in Dad's old house, Mom and Cal's house now, technically, staring up at the attic stairs. What are you doing here, Erin? Mom's voice cut through my thoughts. She'd changed out of her black dress into jeans and one of Cal's oversized shirts, as if mourning was something you could shed like uncomfortable clothing. I want Dad's trunk, I said, not turning around. The military one he kept locked in the attic. I heard her sigh, that particular exhale she'd perfected over the years that conveyed both exhaustion and exasperation. That old thing? It's heavy. Falling apart. Not really your style, honey. It was his, I said simply, already climbing the stairs. The attic smelled like dust and forgotten promises. In the corner, exactly where it had always been, sat the olive green trunk with Dad's name stenciled on the side, SGT, James Mitchell. The brass corners were tarnished, the lock intact despite decades of Minnesota winters and summers. I ran my fingers over the rough canvas, remembering how Dad would sometimes sit up here alone, not opening it, just sitting beside it like it was an old friend who didn't need words. Fine, Mom called up. But you're carrying it down yourself. Cal's back. Can't handle that kind of weight. It took me 40 minutes and several breaks, but I managed to get it to my car. Mom watched from the doorway, arms crossed, that look on her face I'd seen so many times, like she was calculating the cost of something I'd never understand. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls and a voicemail that made my blood run cold. Cal's voice, casual as if discussing lawn maintenance, we're clearing the house today. If you want any of your dad's junk, better come get it now. Otherwise, it's gone. Waste management comes at noon. My hands shook as I tried calling back. No answer. I threw on yesterday's clothes, didn't brush my teeth, just grabbed my keys and drove the 15 minutes to the house in 12. The garage door was open. Empty. The usual clutter of Dad's workshop, his tools, his fishing gear, the workbench where he taught me to change oil and check tire pressure, all gone. I ran inside, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The attic door hung open. Bare floorboards stared back at me where boxes of Christmas decorations, old photo albums, and Dad's service memorabilia had lived my entire life. Where is it? I couldn't breathe. Where's the trunk? Mom appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. The old army box? Cal threw it out this morning. Said it reeked of mildew. Honestly, Aaron, it was time. We can't live in the past forever. That was Dad's, I whispered, then louder, that was Dad's. It was locked for a reason. She shrugged, taking a sip of coffee. Locked doors and locked boxes. Your father loved his secrets, didn't he? Maybe if you knew the full story, you wouldn't worship him like some kind of saint. What story? My voice cracked. What are you talking about? Nothing. Forget it. She turned away, but I grabbed her arm. Monica, what story? She yanked free, coffee sloshing. The story where your perfect father wasn't so perfect. The story where that trunk held nothing but reminders of everything he chose over us. Over me. Her eyes were hard, decades of resentment crystallized in that stare. But sure, go chase after garbage if that's what you want. The truck went to the municipal landfill on Highway 7. I don't remember the drive. Just the panic, the way my chest felt too small for my lungs. The landfill stretched for acres, mountains of black bags and broken furniture. I found a worker, grabbed his fluorescent vest before he could protest. Please, I gasped. An old military trunk. Green. Canvas. It came in this morning. He scratched his head, clearly uncomfortable with my desperation. Lady, we get hundreds of loads a day, please. It was my father's. He just died. They threw it away by mistake. Something in my face must have moved him. He sighed, pulled out a worn notebook. Army trunk? Yeah, actually. Saw some homeless guy dragging it out of Pile 7 about an hour ago. Figured it wasn't worth stopping him. Sorry, lady. I sat in my car in the landfill parking lot for an hour, just staring at nothing. The rain from yesterday had returned, drops hitting the windshield like accusations. Dad was gone. The trunk was gone. The last piece of him that Mom and Cal couldn't rewrite or dismiss, gone that night. I couldn't sleep. I scrolled through my phone, finding every photo of Dad I'd saved. There was one from last 4th of July, him sitting on the porch with that distant look he'd get sometimes. In the background, barely visible, was the corner of the trunk through the attic window. He'd been up there that morning, I remembered now. Cal had made some joke about Dad and his secret treasure, and Dad had just smiled that sad smile and changed the subject. 3 days passed in a blur of work. I called in sick and sleepless nights. I'd started writing down everything I could remember about Dad, afraid that without the trunk, without something tangible, I'd lose him entirely. I was leaving my apartment on the 4th day, finally forcing myself to buy groceries, when I saw him. A homeless man stood by my building's entrance, far enough away to not seem threatening but close enough that I'd have to pass him. He was maybe Dad's age, wearing layers despite the warming weather. His posture caught my attention, straight-backed, shoulders squared. Military, I thought automatically. Dad had taught me to recognize it. He was holding something wrapped in faded fabric. As I got closer, I realized it was an American flag, the kind they sell at surplus stores, worn but carefully folded around whatever was inside. You're his kid, aren't you? His voice was rough but gentle. Sergeant Mitchell's daughter. I stopped, keys clutched between my fingers. How did you? I saw you at the funeral, he said quietly. Sitting alone in the front row while those two walked out. He shifted the bundle in his arms. I served with your father. 3rd Infantry, Fort Stewart. He saved my life back when no one else cared to. I don't remember you, I said carefully. You wouldn't. Last time you saw me, you were maybe 5. Had pigtails. A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. I'm Walter. Walter Danes. Your dad, he helped me through some rough times after we got back. More than rough. He saved me more than once. Walter took a step closer, and I could see his eyes were bright with unshed tears. He gently set the wrapped parcel on the ground between us. I couldn't keep it. Not once I realized whose it was. With shaking hands, I unfolded the flag. Inside was a wooden box, maybe a foot long, 8 inches wide. Oak, with brass hinges. I recognized it immediately, it had been inside Dad's trunk. I'd seen just a glimpse of it once when I was 12, before Dad noticed me and gently closed the lid. They didn't check the bottom, Walter whispered. The trunk had a false bottom. Probably didn't even know it was there when they tossed it. I've been looking for you for 3 days. He paused, studying my face. Before you open it, you should know something. Your mom, she was wrong about him. Whatever she told you, whatever. She made you believe she was wrong. My hands trembled as I carried the box up to my apartment, Walter's words echoing in my mind. I set it on my kitchen table, the overhead light casting shadows across its worn surface. The brass hinges were oxidized but intact, and there was a small keyhole that had been jimmied open, probably by Walter when he'd found it. Inside, wrapped in plastic to protect against moisture, were 4 items, an old cassette tape labeled simply a for Aaron, a thick envelope with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting, a bronze star medal I'd never known he'd earned, and a photograph. The photo showed me at maybe age 3, grinning with missing front teeth, but someone's face had been carefully torn away from beside me. The letter was dated 6 months ago, when Dad's cancer had started winning. His handwriting, usually so precise, showed tremor in places. And my dearest Aaron, if you're reading this, it means they finally got rid of the only part of me left. I'm sorry, I couldn't stop them. I knew Monica had been eyeing that trunk for years, knew Cal saw it as just taking up space. But I also knew that one day, you'd need to know the truth, not Monica's version, not the story she's built to justify her resentments, but the actual truth. I wasn't a perfect man. I want you to know that first. I made mistakes, carried guilt. Failed people I loved. But loving you was never one of those failures, even when it might have seemed like I was absent, like I was lost in my own head. You were my anchor, Aaron. The reason I got up on the days when the weight of everything felt unbearable. The man who will have given you this box is Walter Danes. We served together, yes, but more than that, he became my brother in the aftermath. When he came back broken, when his family couldn't handle what the war had done to him, when he ended up on the streets, I couldn't turn away. Your mother never understood why I'd give him money, why I'd meet him for coffee, why I'd spend hours helping him navigate the VA system. He's not your responsibility, she'd say. But she was wrong. Some people become your family not through blood but through showing up when the world walks away. Monica tried to get me to sell everything in that trunk once. The medals, the photos, even the trunk itself. What's the point of living in the past, she asked. But it wasn't about living in the past. It was about honoring it, learning from it, keeping the parts that mattered while trying to heal from the parts that hurt. The photo with the torn face, that's a conversation for another letter, one I've hidden elsewhere. When you're ready, Walter will know where to find it. Just know that the missing piece of that photo isn't about shame or anger. It's about protecting you from questions I couldn't answer while others were listening. The tape has something I recorded for you when you were deployed to that summer camp in 6th grade and terrified to go. I never sent it because Monica said it would only make you homesick. Maybe she was right. But I kept it because those 2 weeks when you were gone were some of the hardest I'd faced since coming home from Iraq. It made me realize how much of my stability came from being your father. I love you beyond words, beyond time, beyond whatever comes next. Dottie had to read it 3 times before the words stopped blurring. Then I remembered the cassette tape. My neighbor, Mrs. Chan, collected vintage electronics. She lent me an old Walkman, smiling kindly at my red eyes without asking questions. That Dad's voice filled my earbuds, younger, lighter than I remembered. Hey, baby girl. It's Tuesday night. You've been gone 3 days and the house is too quiet. Your mom says I'm being ridiculous, recording this, but I wanted you to have something, just in case you need to hear a familiar voice. There was a pause. Then he cleared his throat. So I thought I'd tell you about the time Grandpa took me camping and we got so lost, the park rangers had to come find us. See, Grandpa was convinced he could navigate by the stars, except he was looking at airplane lights. The story went on for 20 minutes, then he sang the lullaby he'd hummed when I was sick, something his own mother had sung to him. His voice cracked twice, but he kept going. At the end, barely a whisper, "I know you're brave, Aaron. Braver than I ever was. But if you need to come home, that's brave too. Love you to the moon and back, baby girl." I sobbed until my ribs ached. The next morning, I drove to Mom and Cal's house. Mom was in the garden, viciously pruning roses that didn't need it. "Why did you hate him so much?" I asked without preamble. She didn't look up. "I didn't hate your father. You left his funeral 20 minutes in. You threw away his trunk. Because he loved you more than anything else." She whirled around, pruning shears pointed at me like an accusation. And I was tired of being second in my own marriage. Do you have any idea what it's like to compete with a ghost? With a war? With a child who wasn't even— She stopped abruptly. Who wasn't even what? Nothing. Forget it. Cal appeared in the doorway, beer already in hand despite it being 10 in the morning. "The old fool never moved on," he said, words slightly slurred. "Always writing letters to ghosts, keeping secrets in that trunk. Nothing but sad ramblings of a man who couldn't let go of his glory days." "That a junk in the trunk," I said quietly, my voice sharp as Dad's old combat knife, "is the reason I still know who I am. It's the reason I know he loved me, despite you two trying to erase him before he was even cold." I left them there and drove to the underpass where I'd been told Walter sometimes stayed. He was sitting on a milk crate, sharing a sandwich with another vet. When he saw me, he stood, that military posture still evident despite the worn clothes. "He talked about you constantly," Walter said after I sat on the concrete beside him. Not in a bragging way. Just, you were his proof that he'd done something right. That despite everything, the PTSD, the nightmares, the days when he couldn't leave the house, he'd raised someone good. "Tell me about the trunk," I said. "The whole thing. What else was in there?" Walter was quiet for a long moment. "Letters he never sent. Photos from before and during deployment. Some things from buddies who didn't make it back. Dog tags." He paused. "And at the very bottom, under that false panel, there were 3 boxes like the one I gave you. One was labeled for you. One for your mom, though I doubt she'd want it now. And one." He reached into his jacket, pulled out another wrapped bundle. "One he asked me to keep, if anything happened to him. But I think you should see it first." This envelope was older, the paper yellowed. Inside was a photo of Dad at maybe 25, in civilian clothes, holding a baby. Next to him was a woman I'd never seen before, beautiful, laughing, with my exact same nose and chin dot on the back, in different handwriting: James, Aaron, and Sarah. 6 months before. "Sarah was your biological mother," Walter said gently. "She died when you were 2. Car accident. Your dad was devastated, but he kept going for you. Monica came later. She tried, I think, but she could never shake the feeling that she was living in Sarah's shadow." The world tilted. Everything I thought I knew rearranged itself like a kaleidoscope turning. "Monica's not my. She adopted you after they married. Your dad thought it would be better if you didn't know, at least not while you were young. Then years passed, and the truth got harder to tell. Monica got more bitter about it. She couldn't have kids of her own, and instead of that bringing you closer, she saw you as a daily reminder of what your dad had with someone else. I thought about every fight I'd overheard, every cutting remark about Dad living in the past, every time Monica had looked at me with something I thought was disappointment but now recognized as resentment. "There's one more thing," Walter said, pulling out a final envelope. "He made me promise to only give this to you if you ever doubted who he really was." The envelope was labeled, "The Whole Truth." Inside was a hospital bill from 26 years ago. The dates didn't match anything Monica had ever told me about my birth. The hospital was in Georgia, not Minnesota. And the attending physician had made a note: patient Sarah Mitchell died at 0243. Infant transferred to father's custody. My entire life had been built on a careful architecture of omissions. The hospital in Columbus, Georgia, looked different than in the faded photo, modernized, expanded, glass where brick used to be. But the records department was still in the basement, still smelled like old paper and industrial cleaning solution. The clerk, a woman named Dolores with kind eyes and infinite patience, helped me navigate the system to request archived records. 26 years ago, you said? And you have the death certificate? She typed carefully, her acrylic nails clicking on the keyboard. Oh, honey. Says here there was a special circumstance note. Let me get my supervisor. The supervisor, a man who looked like he'd been working there since the hospital opened, reviewed my documents. You're the infant from this record? Aaron Mitchell. Yes. He disappeared into a back room, returning with a manila folder that had seen better days. These were supposed to be digitized years ago, but somehow never made it. Small mercy, perhaps. Some things need to be handed over in person. The records were more complete than I'd expected. Sarah Elizabeth Connor, 24 years old. Married to James Mitchell 16 months prior. Complications from a congenital heart condition exacerbated by childbirth. She'd held on for 18 months after I was born, through 2 surgeries and countless treatments. The final admission showed Dad had been there for 6 straight days, never leaving her side. There was a social worker's note: father shows remarkable dedication to infant despite circumstances. Refuses family assistance, states he and child will be fine, we have each other. Recommended grief counseling. Father declined. I sat in my car afterward, staring at these papers that rewrote my entire history. Then I drove to Monica's house. She was alone, Cal's truck wasn't in the driveway. When she opened the door, I held up the hospital records. Her face went pale, then red, then something like resigned. Come in, she said quietly. We sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten thousands of meals, where I'd done homework, where Dad had taught me to play chess. Monica made tea, her hands shaking slightly. I met your father at a grief support group, she began without prompting. I'd lost my husband 2 years before. Brain aneurysm. Sudden. James had been going for about 6 months, since Sarah died. You were with a babysitter. He talked about you constantly, how you were walking everywhere, getting into everything, how you'd started calling every woman mama at the grocery store. She stared into her tea. I fell in love with him. With both of you, actually. You were this bright, bubbly thing, and James was so gentle with you. Patient. Even when the grief was eating him alive, he'd smile the moment you entered a room. So what changed? I asked. Nothing changed. That was the problem. Her voice was bitter but tired, like a fight she'd been having for decades. He loved Sarah first, loved her completely, and I was always going to be second. Then you started looking more and more like her as you grew. Same laugh. Same way of tilting your head when you were thinking. And James, he'd look at you with such love and such pain simultaneously. That wasn't my fault. No, she agreed. It wasn't. But I was 28 and stupid and thought I could make him love me the way he'd loved her. When I couldn't, I blamed you. Then I blamed him. Then I just blamed everyone. She looked up at me. I tried to be your mother. I need you to know that. For years, I tried. But every school play, every birthday, every Christmas, there was this shadow. And James wouldn't talk about her. Wouldn't put away her photos, the ones in that damned trunk. Wouldn't let me redecorate your room because Sarah had picked out the wallpaper when she was pregnant. He was grieving. For 26 years? She laughed, sharp and hurt. That's not grief, Aaron. That's a choice. He chose to stay in love with a dead woman rather than build a life with a living one. I wanted to argue, but something in her face stopped me. The pain there was real, even if her response to it had been cruel. The trunk, I said instead. Why throw it away now? Because he's gone, and I thought maybe I could finally stop competing. Stop being the consolation prize in my own life. She wiped her eyes. Cal said it was worthless. Just old military garbage. But I knew better. I knew it was his shrine too. Everything that came before me. There was a box in there for you, I said quietly. Dad left you something too. Her hands stilled. I don't want it. Maybe not. But it exists. Walter has it, if you ever change your mind. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been burning since I'd found the first photo, the picture of me as a toddler. Someone's face was torn out. Was it Sarah? Monica nodded. Your father did that himself. Said it was too painful. But he couldn't bear to throw away the photo of you, so he just removed her. Like he tried to do with everything. Keep the parts he could handle, hide the rest. I stood to leave, then stopped. The house. Dad's will. I know my name is on the deed. Her face went white again. Cal's been borrowing against the equity. He said once we sold it, I'm not going to take the house, I said. But I want his study cleared out properly. His books, his papers, everything. And I want a month to go through it all. She nodded quickly, relief visible. The next week, I spent every evening in Dad's study. I found more letters, more photos, fragments of a life I'd never known. In a hidden compartment in his desk, Dad and his hidden compartments, I found a journal from my first 3 years. Every milestone, every word, every fever and scraped knee documented with the precision of someone terrified of forgetting anything. The last entry was from the day before he married Monica. Aaron asked where Mama went. I told her Mama became the stars so she could watch over us better. She said that was silly because stars can't give hugs. I had no answer for that. Monica tries to hug her, but Aaron just goes stiff, like she knows something's off. Maybe kids always know. Maybe we're the ones who forget how to tell the difference between what's real and what we're settling for. I also found Walter's military records, newspaper clippings about his service, about his struggles after coming home. Dad had kept every article, every VA form he'd helped Walter fill out, every receipt for meals he'd bought him. In the margins of one article about homeless veterans, Dad had written, "There but for the grace of God and baby girls laughter go I." I tried to find Walter again to show him, but he'd vanished from his usual spots. Another homeless vet said someone from the VA had come by, that Walter had finally agreed to go into transitional housing. About time, the man said. Walt's a good guy. Deserved better than this. A week later, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address, but I recognized Walter's careful printing. Inside was a photo I'd never seen, Dad in his desert fatigues. Walter beside him, and between them, a satellite phone. On the back, the day your dad called to hear your first words. You said dog apparently. He cried for an hour. There was a note, getting help finally. Real help. Your dad would say it's about time. The address below is where I'll be for the next few months if you want to write. Thank you for looking for the truth instead of accepting the easy story. That's your dad and you. The best parts of him. The last thing in the package was another small box, this one with my mother's, Sarah's, name on it. Inside were her letters to Dad during deployment, ultrasound photos of me, and a baby name list where Aaron was circled with a note, Irish for peace. May she bring you home safe. At the bottom was a CD, labeled in Dad's handwriting, Sarah singing to Aaron, 3 months old. I didn't have a CD player, but Mrs. Chen did. We sat in her living room as a voice I'd never consciously heard but somehow recognized in my bones sang a lullaby. The same one Dad had hummed. Halfway through, you could hear a baby Mia gurgling happily. Then Dad's voice, young and unbroken, "That's right, baby girl. That's your mama. Prettiest voice in Georgia." The recording ended with Sarah laughing, saying, "She's going to be musical, I can tell. Look at her try to sing along." Dad's response, "Just like her mama. Perfect, just like her mama." I sat in Mrs. Chen's living room and cried while she held my hand and said nothing, which was exactly right. That night, I made a decision. I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to offer Monica and Cal a deal. They could have the house free and clear if they agreed to two conditions. First, a room at the VA transitional housing would be paid for a year in Dad's name, ensuring Walter had somewhere safe. Second, the contents of Dad's study would be donated to the local military history museum, with a plaque reading, "From the collection of Sergeant James Mitchell, who served with honor and loved without reservation." Monica agreed immediately. Cal grumbled but had no choice. The day before the house officially transferred, I stood in Dad's empty study one last time. The walls showed pale rectangles where pictures had hung, the carpet indented where his desk had sat for 20 years. I placed a single photo on the windowsill, the one of him, Sarah, and baby me, faces all intact, all together. "I found her, Dad," I whispered. "I found you both. I found the whole story." I could almost hear his response, that quiet hum of acknowledgement he'd make when words weren't enough, but silence wasn't right either. As I walked out, I left the door open. No more locked doors, no more hidden compartments. The truth, messy and painful and complicated as it was, deserved light and air. Monica was standing in the kitchen when I came down. "I loved him," she said suddenly. "I need you to know that." It wasn't enough, but it was real. "I know," I said, and meant it. The woman he loved, Sarah, she was easy to love. Bright and kind, and never asked him to be anything other than what he was. I always asked for more. For different. For better. You asked for what you needed. That's not wrong. She smiled sadly. No. But it was wrong for him. And instead of leaving, I stayed and made everyone miserable. There was nothing to say to that, so I didn't try. I just walked to my car, the restored trunk pieces and Dad's boxes safely in the back. As I drove away, I saw Monica in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway of a house that would never really be hers. No matter what the deed said. That evening, I began writing. Not just Dad's story or Sarah's story or even my own, but the story of how we carry our ghosts, how we honor our dead, how we learn to live with love that transcends death and disappointment, and the terrible things we do to each other when we are hurting. I called it The Trunk Project, a collection of stories from forgotten veterans, lost parents, the children who struggle to understand them. Within a week, 3 people had reached out wanting to share their own stories. Within a month, it was a dozen, and Walter wrote from the VA housing, "Your dad would be proud. Not of the project, though that's good too. But of you choosing to understand. Instead of just judge. That's harder than being angry." He knew that better than most. The first story I recorded, sitting in my apartment with the cassette player Mrs. Chen had given me, was my own. I started with the funeral, with the empty chairs, with the flag that weighed more than it should. But I also talked about the love that survived abandonment, the truth that survived burial, the connections that refuse to break even when everything else falls apart. "My name is Aaron Mitchell," I began. "My father was a soldier who saved lives in Iraq and continued saving them when he came home. My mother was Sarah, who loved me for 18 months with a broken heart that refused to quit. My other mother is Monica, who tried to love a man who was already spoken for by ghosts. This is our story. All of our stories. The parts we hide and the parts we honor and the parts that refuse to stay buried, no matter how deep we dig the hole." Outside, a cardinal landed on my windowsill, Sarah's favorite bird, according to a note I'd found. Dad's favorite too, after she died. It sang twice, bright and clear, then flew away. I kept recording. The coffee shop on Hennepin Avenue was nearly empty when Monica burst through the door, her face flushed with rage. I'd chosen a public place deliberately. Witnesses tend to keep people civil. But Monica was past caring about appearances. You're seriously going to sue your own mother? She slammed the legal notice onto the table, making my latte jump. You made that decision when you sold off Dad's life like garbage, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. That house is all Cal and I have left. You'd really make us homeless over some petty revenge? This isn't revenge. It's justice. There's a difference. She leaned in close, her perfume sharp and aggressive. Your father left me with nothing but debt and ghosts. That house is the only thing worth anything, and you want to take that too. Dad's will says differently. Your father wasn't in his right mind those last months. The cancer, the medications, stop. I pulled out my phone. Showed her a video. It was Dad, 3 months before he died, sitting with Mr. Abramson and a notary. His voice was clear, determined. I want to ensure my daughter Erin retains her interest in the family home. She'll know what to do with it better than anyone. Monica went white. Where did you get that? Mr. Abramson. Turns out Dad asked him to witness and record it, just in case anyone questioned his mental capacity. I put the phone away. I'm not trying to hurt you, Monica. But I won't let you and Cal erase him completely. That evening, Cal was waiting by my car. The parking garage was dim, empty except for us. He leaned against my driver's door, trying for casual intimidation but achieving only middle-aged desperation. You think you're smart, he said, not quite slurring but close. That trunk didn't just have medals, girl. It had receipts. Things you don't want getting out. Like what? I kept my hand on my phone, ready to dial 911. Like how your daddy wasn't the hero you think. Like how he covered up things in Iraq. Like how that friend of his, Walter, isn't just some charity case. I almost laughed. You're trying to blackmail me with made-up stories about a dead man? His face darkened. Made up? Your father sent money to Walter every month for 15 years. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself what Walter had on him. He helped a brother veteran who was struggling. That's called honor, Cal. I wouldn't expect you to understand. He pushed off my car, stumbled slightly. We're drowning, you stupid girl. I used his pension to invest in a sure thing that went belly up. The house is all we have. You stole his pension. Invested. Monica signed the papers. She's got power of attorney. He smiled ugly. Or had. Before he died. We're being investigated now, thanks to you stirring things up. I recorded the whole conversation on my phone. My lawyer, Mr. Brennan, was thrilled when I played it for him the next morning. This changes things significantly, he said, adjusting his glasses. Fraud, elder abuse, theft. Your stepmother and her husband are looking at criminal charges, not just civil. I don't want Monica in jail, I said, surprising myself. She was wrong, but she was also trapped in a marriage with a man who couldn't love her fully. That's punishment enough. And Cal can rot. Mr. Brennan also had news about the will. Your father updated it 6 months before his death. Filed it properly, witnesses and all. He left you not just partial ownership but controlling interest, 51%. He also left detailed instructions about why. He handed me a letter. Sealed and labeled for the court, if necessary. Dad's letter outlined Monica's increasing hostility, Cal's financial manipulation, and his fears about what would happen to his legacy after his death. He documented conversations, dates, times. The soldier in him had kept meticulous records. There's one more thing, Mr. Brennan said. A neighbor, Mr. Abramson, provided a sworn affidavit. Says he witnessed several instances of your stepmother and her husband discussing selling the house while your father was in the hospital, before he'd even passed. I thought about Dad in that hospital bed, knowing they were already dividing his assets, and felt fresh grief pierce through me. 2 days later, Monica showed up at my apartment. She'd been crying, her usually perfect makeup streaked and smudged. "We're drowning, Aaron. Cal's business partners are threatening him. The investigation found discrepancies going back 2 years. We could lose everything." "You already lost everything." "That mattered," I said. "Please. I know I wasn't a good mother to you. I know I failed James. But I'm 63 years old. I can't start over." I studied her, this woman who'd raised me reluctantly, who'd resented me for existing, who'd thrown away my father's memory like trash. But I also saw the woman who'd made my school lunches for 12 years, who'd come to my college graduation. Who'd tried, in her broken way, to create a family from fragments. "I'll offer you a buyout," I said finally. "Enough to get a small apartment, pay off Cal's debts, start fresh. But there are conditions." "Anything." "First, Cal gets nothing. The divorce papers get filed this week. Second, you donate Dad's service medals to the Veterans Museum, in his name. Third, you write a letter, honest, complete, about Sarah. About Dad. About why you did what you did. For the record. For history." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "And fourth," I continued, "you get therapy. Real therapy. Deal with your anger, your grief, whatever poisoned you all these years." "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me after everything?" "Because Dad would want me to. Because holding on to anger is what destroyed you, and I won't let it destroy me." The next week, I returned to the house with legal supervision. Monica watched from the kitchen as I packed Dad's remaining belongings. His dress uniform, cleaned and pressed. Photos from a footlocker in the basement she and Cal had missed. His old cassette player with a box of tapes, recordings of me as a child, of Sarah singing, of his own thoughts dictated late at night when insomnia won in his closet. Behind a panel I only knew about because Dad had shown me once when I was 7, our secret hiding spot. "Baby girl," I found one last item, Sarah's wedding ring and a note, "For Aaron, when she's ready to know about the love that made her." Monica stood in the doorway. "I never knew about that spot." "No," I said simply. "You wouldn't have." Cal was nowhere to be seen, already fled to his brother's house in Wisconsin, according to neighbors, before I left. I stood in the empty living room where Dad had taught me to dance standing on his feet, where he'd read me stories, where he'd sat during those last months, getting thinner and quieter but never losing the soft smile when he looked at me. "I got it, Dad," I whispered to the walls. "I found the truth. You weren't forgotten." The house sold 2 months later. Monica took her buyout and moved to a senior community in Bloomington. She sent me a letter, the one I'd requested. It was 12 pages of painful honesty, self-recrimination, and surprising insight. She ended with, "I loved your father. I hated that he couldn't love me back the same way. I turned that hate outward instead of dealing with it inward. You deserved better. So did he." My new apartment was smaller than the old one, but it faced Loring Park and got morning sun. I'd used part of the house sale proceeds to pay for it outright, no mortgage, no ties to anyone. The military trunk, pieced back together with Walter's help and a furniture restorer's patience, sat at the foot of my bed. Some nights, I'd sit beside it like Dad used to, not opening it, just being near it. I took a part-time job at the Minnesota Military Museum, cataloging stories and artifacts. The pay was modest, but the work felt like purpose. In the evenings, I volunteered at Liberty House, a shelter for homeless veterans. That's where I was when someone called my name. "Aaron Mitchell?" I turned to find a woman my mother's age, Sarah's age, had she lived. She wore a volunteer badge and a gentle smile. "I'm Patricia Connor. I was Sarah's cousin." The world tilted again, that familiar feeling of history reshaping itself. We sat in the shelter's small office, cups of bitter coffee between us. "I've been looking for you for years," Patricia said. "After Sarah died, your father cut ties with her family. We understood, the grief was too much. But I always wondered about you." She pulled out a photo album, worn and cherished. There was Sarah as a child, a teenager, a young woman. There was one of her and Dad at their wedding, both glowing with that particular light of new love. And there were dozens of me as a baby, photos I'd never seen. "Sarah sent these before she died," Patricia explained. "She wanted her family to know you, even if she couldn't introduce you herself." I traced my finger over a photo of Sarah holding infant me, her face thin from illness but radiant with love. What was she like? Stubborn. Funny. She sang constantly. In the shower, in the car, doing dishes. She loved your father with a ferocity that scared us sometimes. When she got sick, she fought harder than the doctors thought possible. 18 months, they said, was a miracle. She called it stubbornness. Patricia became a regular part of my life after that. She'd bring photos, stories, recipes Sarah had loved. Through her, I met other cousins, an aunt, a whole constellation of family I'd never known existed. They welcomed me like I'd always belonged, like I was Sarah returned to them in some small way. The Trunk Project grew organically. What started as recording a few veteran stories became something larger. I created a website, started a podcast, began collecting not just stories but artifacts, photos, letters, medals, the physical remnants of service that families didn't know how to honor. Walter's story was the third episode. He sat in the small recording studio I'd rented, wearing the new clothes the VA had provided, looking healthier than I'd ever seen him. "Your father saved my life," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Not in combat, though he did that too. But after. When I came home broken, when my wife left, when I couldn't hold a job or look at myself in the mirror. Jim Mitchell sat with me through the DTs, drove me to meetings, never judged when I relapsed. He'd say, 'Walt, you carried me through Fallujah. Let me carry you through this.'" The episode went viral in veteran circles. Emails poured in, children of veterans wanting to understand their parents, veterans wanting to share their stories, families offering artifacts they'd been holding onto without knowing why. One email stood out: "My grandfather told me to contact you if I ever saw your project. He served with a Jim Mitchell in Iraq. He has something for you." The grandson, Marcus, was 17. His grandfather, Eddie Torino, was in hospice care but alert. When I visited, he grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Your old man was the best of us," Eddie wheezed. "Need you to know something. That money he sent Walter wasn't guilt. Wasn't blackmail like that son of a bitch Cal suggested. Your dad took responsibility for Walter because Walt took a bullet meant for him. Never told anyone, Walter didn't. Too proud. But your dad knew what that kind of debt meant." He had his grandson pull out a small box. Inside was a photo of Dad and Walter on a dusty road, arms around each other's shoulders, and a bronze star. "This was your dad's," Eddie said. "He gave it to me when my boy was killed. Said it would mean more to a grieving father than sitting in a trunk. I kept it safe. Time it went home. I added it to the trunk, another piece of Dad returned. 6 months into the project, a publisher reached out. "These stories need a wider audience," she said. "Let us help you share them." The book took a year to compile. Each story was verified, contextualized, treated with the reverence it deserved. I titled it, "What We Carry, Stories from the Trunk." The dedication read, "To my father, who was more than a soldier. To Walter, who returned more than a box. To Sarah, who loved fiercely and briefly. To Monica, who tried and failed and tried again. And to everyone whose stories were buried, but never lost." Walter's health began declining just as the book went to print. The years on the streets had taken their toll, despite the VA's best efforts. I visited him daily in the hospice ward, reading him chapters, sharing emails from people moved by his story. "I thought I'd die forgotten," he said one afternoon, his voice barely a whisper. "Just another homeless vet. But now I'm in a book. My name means something again." "Your name always meant something," I said, holding his hand. Dad made sure of that. Walter passed on a Tuesday morning in March. 5 people attended his funeral, should have been less, but word had spread through the veteran community. By the time we reached the cemetery, there were 50 veterans in various uniforms, standing at attention as Walter was buried with full military honors. I placed a copy of the book in his casket, bookmarked to his chapter. On the flyleaf, I'd written, "You came back when no one else did. Thank you, Aaron." The book launched to modest but meaningful success. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its audience, the children of veterans, the families trying to understand, the veterans themselves seeing their experiences validated. The AT readings, someone would always approach afterward with their own trunk, their own hidden artifacts. "We didn't know what to do with these," they'd say. "Dad never talked about the war. Mom just kept everything locked away." I started workshops, opening the trunk, teaching families how to preserve, honor, and understand military artifacts and the stories they held. Museums began requesting loans from the collection. Schools invited me to speak. One evening, after a particularly emotional workshop where a daughter discovered her mother had been a nurse in Vietnam, I found Monica in the audience. She looked older, softer somehow. "I heard about the book," she said. "About what you're doing. How are you?" I asked, surprising myself by meaning it. "Better. Therapy helps. Living alone helps. Not being angry all the time helps more." She paused. I read the book. The dedication. "Thank you for including me, even after everything. You were part of the story. Not the villain you made yourself into, just a person who got lost in someone else's grief." She nodded, tears threatening. "I have something for you." She handed me an envelope. I found it going through old papers. "It's from your father, written to you but never sent. From before Sarah died." The letter was dated 2 weeks after my birth. Dad's handwriting was looser, happier. "Sweet Aaron, you're sleeping in your mother's arms as I write this. She's singing that song she loves, the Irish one about coming home. We picked your name together. She wanted something strong, I wanted something peaceful. Aaron was both. You're both. 2 weeks old and already you've changed everything. The world makes sense in a way it didn't before. Your mom says that's what love does, reorganizes the universe around itself. She's right. She usually is. I want you to know, whatever happens, however long we get, this moment, your mother singing, you sleeping, me watching you both, this is perfect. This is home. This is everything." The book launch at the Veterans Museum drew more people than expected. Walter's empty chair sat in the front row, his photo propped against it, the flag from his funeral draped over the back. Someone had left flowers, white roses, which I learned later were from Monica. I opened with the story everyone had come to hear, but not the way they expected. "They threw away the trunk," I began, my voice carrying through the packed room. "But they couldn't throw away the man inside it. They tried to bury his story under resentment and revision, but stories have a way of clawing back to the surface. My father, Sergeant James Mitchell, was not a perfect man. He was a grieving widower, a struggling veteran, a father doing his best with a heart broken in multiple places. But he was also a keeper of stories, a protector of memories, a man who understood that what we carry matters more than what we leave behind." The local news picked up the story. Then regional. Then national. Not because it was unique, these stories happen every day, but because it was universal. Everyone had a trunk somewhere, literal or metaphorical, filled with things too painful to examine but too precious to discard. Marcus, Eddie Torino's grandson, started a social media campaign, #ShowYourTrunk. Within days, thousands of people were sharing photos of military artifacts their families had hidden away, along with the stories they'd finally learned. The museum received so many donations they had to create a special exhibition, Hidden Service, Stories from America's Trunks. I curated it, working with historians to contextualize each piece. Dad's trunk became the centerpiece, restored and displayed with his letters, medals, and photos arranged to tell not just his story but the story of a generation of veterans who came home to fight different battles. Monica attended the exhibition opening. She stood for a long time in front of a photo of Dad and Sarah's wedding, then moved to one of Dad and her own wedding 5 years later. The museum had placed them side by side with a placard I'd written, "Love is not diminished by loss, only complicated by it." James Mitchell loved twice, grieved always, and found meaning in the balance between memory and moving forward. "Thank you," Monica whispered, not looking at me, "for making him whole instead of choosing sides." My cousin from Sarah's side, Patricia, approached us. The two women who'd loved my father, one by blood connection and one by marriage, stood awkwardly for a moment. Then Patricia extended her hand. "You raised her well," she said to Monica. "Sarah would be grateful." Monica's composure cracked. "I tried. I failed a lot, but I tried." "That's all any of us do," Patricia said gently. The exhibition ran for 6 months and traveled to 12 cities. At each stop, new stories emerged. In Chicago, a woman brought her grandmother's WAC uniform, hidden in a closet for 40 years. In Seattle, a man discovered his father's conscientious objector papers and the psychiatric evaluations that followed. In Miami, 3 siblings finally opened their mother's footlocker to find she'd been a codebreaker, sworn to secrecy even after the war. The publisher wanted a second book. I was considering it when I got a call from an unexpected source, a Hollywood producer. "We want to option your story for a limited series," she said. "Not dramatized, not sensationalized. The real thing. The complicated, painful, beautiful truth of it." I thought about Dad, how he'd hate the attention but love that Walter's story would be told. I thought about Sarah, forever young in those photos, whose voice deserved to be heard. I thought about Monica, who'd agreed to be interviewed, to own her part in the story. "On one condition," I said. "The proceeds go to establishing transitional housing for homeless veterans. Call it the Mitchell-Danes House." The series filmed over 3 months. They cast an unknown actress who looked startlingly like the photos of Sarah. The actor playing Dad had the same quiet intensity, the same way of holding grief in his shoulders. Watching the dailies was like seeing ghosts made flesh. Monica visited the set once. She watched them film the scene where she and Dad met at the grief counseling group. The actress playing her captured something I'd never seen, the hope she must have felt then, before it curdled into resentment. "I really did love him," she said quietly. "I just didn't know how to love what he loved." The series aired to critical acclaim and modest ratings. But the impact was larger than numbers. Veterans organizations reported increased requests for help. Families started talking about their own hidden histories. Museums saw upticks in donations of military artifacts. I kept the original trunk in my apartment, but I added to it Walter's final letter, Patricia's photos of Sarah, even Monica's 12-page confession. It became not just Dad's trunk but our trunk, a repository of complicated love and imperfect people trying to honor what mattered. One morning, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a small leather journal, water-damaged and worn. The first page had Dad's handwriting, "For Erin, when she's ready to carry her own stories." The rest was blank. I sat at my desk, picked up a pen, and began. "My name is Erin Mitchell. I am the daughter of James, who served with honor and loved with complications. I am the daughter of Sarah, who sang through heartbreak and fought for 18 extra months. I am the daughter of Monica, who tried to mother a ghost and lost herself in the process. This is what I carry." The doorbell interrupted me. A young woman stood outside, holding a battered army duffel bag. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "But my grandmother just died. She was a nurse in Afghanistan." We found this bag, and inside was a note that said if we didn't know what to do with her things, we should find you. That you'd understand. I invited her in, made tea, and listened to another story that had been waiting to be told. Later, after she left, I returned to the journal and added, "This is what I carry, the understanding that every trunk holds a universe. Every artifact tells multiple truths, and every story we save saves someone else in return." Outside, it began to rain, the kind of gentle spring rain that makes everything grow. I thought about Dad, about Sarah, about Walter, about all the trunks still hidden in attics and basements, waiting for someone brave enough to open them. The phone rang. Another family, another trunk, another story refusing to stay buried. "Tell me," I said, settling in to listen. "Tell me what you found." Because that's what we do with what we carry. We share the weight until it becomes bearable, we speak the names until they become memory, we open the trunks until all that's left is truth and the strange, terrible, beautiful way love persists. Despite everything we do to bury it, the rain continued, soft and insistent, like a lullaby someone's mother sang once, like a soldier's voice on an old cassette tape. Like all the stories still waiting to come home. If someone threw away the last piece of your parent tomorrow, would you fight to get it back, even if it meant discovering truths that could shatter everything you believed about your family? Hit that like button if this story moved you, and subscribe to hear more about the secrets we keep and the love that survives them.